All right, welcome back. We are GAME2014. That's Mobile Game Development 1 in the fall 2021 semester at George Brown College, and it's week 3, part 2 of our broadcast. And what we're doing is we're talking about user interfaces that are responsive, that we're going to kind of put together for mobile game dev. For this one, again, I have a little video that I'm recording right now on YouTube. And what we want to do is online here, up on Blackboard, I want to see if the video will actually work this time around, or if I'm actually going to make it a link. And yeah, see, Blackboard is really weird. Sometimes it works, and sometimes it just doesn't want to cooperate at all. And that's perfectly fine. Doesn't matter to me. You'll get the video either way. That's part 2. All right. So part 1 and part 2, if you click on it, it should take you to a video for this, the stuff that we're doing. So that's where you go, and that's how it'll run. It's not optimal as it opens up a new screen in on YouTube, but it is what it is. All right, so what we want to do is we want to bring up Unity again, and I've got Lab 1B that I want to bring up. I want to use this as a basis, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show this in Explorer, right? Here's my Lab 1B in Explorer, and then what you can do as a basis is what I asked you guys to do, is download this thing. And if you look at Lab 1B or any lab, a lot of times they have a bunch of things here. One of them is you have the library folder, and then you also have builds folders. If you're going to copy a project from one project to the other and keep the kind of all the stuff that you've worked on, you don't need the build folders or the library folders. So if I delete these, similar to what your gitignore file does, if I delete those, then what I end up getting is I don't have a project with library folders or builds folders, right? And when I launch Unity for the second time, it will generate these folders for us. Okay, that's what they do. That's what Unity does. And same thing with the VS folders and any temporary folders that are required for Unity to function. It takes a few moments more for that to happen, but it's pretty cool. Git, on the other hand, if I wanted to continue the commits that I was working on last week and I want to have them this week, then I have to copy this whole project without the builds and library folder, and then create a new remote for Git from this one. So could I copy it? Yes, I could, but it's just as easy for me to go up on here when I come to Lab 1B and then download the code just like you. So I'm going to do the same thing as you did. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to download the zip archive. And once I have that zip archive, let's bring that up. It will be under my downloads folder, which is here. I want to cut this, and I want to go back to my this folder here and paste it just like you would do. There it is. And then if I use 7-zip to extract it, it's going to create another folder called Lab1B main. I don't need this one anymore, so I can get rid of this folder right here. And then what this does, the difference between this Lab1B that I made and Lab1B main, and you'll see the difference here as well, is that Lab1B has library, build, and builds folder, and Lab1B main does not. Okay, notice that it doesn't have that, and a few other things got to remove it as well. So that's the important.
Mine doesn't have a builds folder, and I just took it from the desktop.
You mean you took it from GitHub?
Yeah, no builds already.
That's right. Shouldn't have any of that stuff. Right. So here.
Good to go. Do I need to still zip it and then unzip it?
No. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new lab called 2A. There it is. All I'm doing is taking the zip archive and pulling it down. The reason why mine shows builds and libraries is because this is what I made for you guys, right? If you're downloading it from GitHub, you won't have these at all. They're ignored, remember, in the gitignore file, as well as other things. So, but now that I've made lab 2A, doesn't have that stuff. And I want to start with lab 2A, which is just a copy of lab 1B. Okay. But whenever we go back in, we have to do some builds and stuff as well. Raquel, there's nothing to be confused about. I'm just showing you the difference between pulling something from GitHub compared to making a copy of your own and using your own lab as a copy. If you copy everything, you also copy the .git folder, and it'll point to the wrong remote, and that's not what you want. Okay. So now that I have lab 2A, right, as an example, I want to launch it in Unity, and I've made a copy. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to click Create Open, and I'm going to select the lab, the project that I want, which is this one, lab 2A. Notice, by the way, going back, it's very small. So lab 2A is 88.5 kilobytes, right? And that's coming from GitHub. Whereas my original project was 1.76 gigabytes, right? 1.76 gigabytes for practically nothing. It was empty. Why? Because it also had the builds folders, and the builds folders and the library folder are very large in terms of the overhead, the temporary files that are created. And that's why we use a gitignore file, a gitignore, kind of a file for when we put it up on GitHub. So again, I'm choosing lab 2A just to the assets folder level, and then I'm clicking select folder. And when I do, you're going to see it pop up here. If you chose the wrong folder, it'll say can't find a Unity project. And then it's going to start my Unity project. What it's going to do is it's going to load things again as if you've never been here before. It's going to load, kind of all the packages again. It's going to import them, as an example. And what it's going to do is, as it imports new packages, it's going to rebuild your library folders and any other temporary files it requires. So it's going to take some time. As soon as you launch it in Unity, it'll do all that stuff. It'll rebuild the library folder. Okay, let's do this thing while it's launching. And if you're watching a video on YouTube and you're waiting for me to to run this thing, just fast forward. For the rest of us, we have to wait. I'm sure you're waiting for your stuff to launch if you did it with me. If you did it beforehand, and if you're waiting for me because you did it from the break, that's awesome. So one of the biggest challenges we had when we first started using Unity back in the day was when we put stuff up on GitHub, it broke Unity when you pulled it back down. And the reason for that is because Unity, handles by default. You can turn this off. A bunch of meta files, as an example, that it holds to kind of create its folder structure. Okay, that's the important stuff. So what you want to do always, at least without using Unity Colab, is actually turn down Unity, let it close gracefully, and go from there. So let's just pull up my layout that I want. And again, I want to do the 2D mobile layout portrait, which looks like this. Okay. So that's the layout for my scene so far, which is pretty good. And what I want to do is I want to file, save, and file. Let's try that again. I want to open up, let's open up my scene. That'd be nice. First, here's my scene, which is a very simple scene. And then I want to file, save, and then file, save project, right? And what I want to do before I put this up on GitHub is I want to switch platforms. So I'm going to switch platforms to, so I'm going to go to build settings and then switch platforms to Android, please. Do that right away. So switch platforms. This will take a few minutes, but it also include several files as an example. And and it'll make some changes to the files that we have in Unity on the background, right? So for example, things like textures and anything else you include. And I'm just going to wait for this to happen. Great. So there's I've switched to Android. It shows that. Also, I'm going to be testing an LD player. So I'm going to bring that up as well. So I'm going to grab LD player and pull that up now. So we have LD player waiting for me to run. Okay, so that way I've got all my tools going, and I can deploy to LD player for testing as well. Again, LD player or any other emulator is far better than just using the simulator in Unity, because the simulator in Unity does not give you a true sense of all the stuff that's happening. And when I do that, you can see that in the beginning, because I launched Unity first and LD player second, I don't see the list. It's not in the list here, but if I click refresh, then you'll see it's going to fetch connected devices. That's everything that's compatible from an Android perspective. And then I can choose Samsung SMG975N as my emulator. Okay. You also want to look at player settings, and some of these should already be preserved for you, right? So when you downloaded the project, just like I did, then you'll see this. You'll see product name, F2021 Lab 1B. I'm going to change this so it says Lab 2A. In resolution and presentation, you'll also see that it's going to only work on portrait. So some of the settings have been preserved for you as an example. And in other settings, you should also see that your package name, you may have to modify just to make your package, because it's an identifier for your project. It's got to be unique every single time. Otherwise, you're going to overwrite the stuff that's on the emulator. I'm using an API level of 25 at the minimum. And as we mentioned last time, IL2CPP and .NET 4.x is the minimum requirements you need to put it up on the store for it to work. If you don't have these, it won't work so easily. And when you enable IL2CPP and .NET 4.x, you also have to enable ARM64, right? So it works properly. So those are all the settings by default that I've kept from last time. And when we put it up on GitHub, those settings were not lost; they were preserved. Okay, great. So now that I have that, that's fantastic, right? And what I want to try and do now is put this up on GitHub as a new project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go File, Save again, one more time, File, Save Project. Let's close down Unity, because that's what we want to try and do before we put it up on GitHub. And again, later on this course, I'll show you how to do it without doing this. There's other challenges involved, but you can do that. I want to bring up Gitkraken. And again, Gitkraken will bring up the last project that you have up. So whatever that last project was, you can close that one off and use the one we want. Notice it has a list of projects that I was using before. And what I want to do is I want to start a new local repo. So where I want to point to is I want to point to the right folder. So let's point to the folder that makes sense for us here, right? And wow. And that is this one, okay? But if I was to put this folder in play, you're going to see that if I click select folder, it puts the path here. And sometimes what that does is it creates another project inside of this project, which is kind of a weird thing for Gitkraken to do. So instead of that, what I do is I swim up one level, right? And if I just select the project name this way, so I'm up one level, so I'm in GAME2014, the containing folder, and click select folder. You can see the path is different there. But what I want to do is put in the path of the project right here. So again, I can select the project name, so Lab 2A in my case. So copy that and then just put it in there. And why did this not work? Lab 2A, it's really weird today. Wow. I love when this happens. Something's up. Yeah, I'm just gonna have to do it with my hand. See how it unhighlights like that? It's amazing. That's just me with my funky computer stuff happening. So I'll spell it by itself. Let's do it manually. It's no problem. So it's GAME 2014 in the fall 2021 semester, and it's Lab 2A. Here we go. Yeah, I didn't clone the repo. I just downloaded the zip archive. I'm showing you how to do this because a lot of times we go just like how I'm going right now. I don't have a getignore template, so I want to add a Unity one. And again, this also gets us to do the same thing over and over again. I also want to use an MIT license because that's how I feel like doing it today. And I'm going to click Create Repository. If I did everything fine, then this will be my repository, my full path to my local repository right here. Create repository. And I have a bunch of, you can see that I did everything right because I have a bunch of assets that I haven't added. So I'm going to click Stage All Assets or Changes, and I'm going to say Added Project Files here. Again, just using this interface is pretty good. I don't have a remote, so if I click on Push, by the way, this is just a review of what we did already. So you should know all this stuff from last week. Okay, if I go and click Push, it'll ask me, I don't have a remote. Do you want to create one? Yes, I do. And then it'll connect me with my GitHub repository. If you haven't done this before, it'll ask you to do this for the first time, which is fine. And then you can see that that is my repository name. And I can choose public or private access. And I can also put in a description. So something like demo project for GAME 2014 in the fall 2021 semester. Lab 2. Right? And then I can create my remote and push local references. So it's going to make this remote repository on GitHub. And if I did everything right, then it's going to show that I'm good. It'll have this little message that pops up, and then I can view it on GitHub. So if I go up here and go to George Brown College, you can see now I have Lab 2A. There it is, right? Nothing's wrong with forking it. It just does things differently. That's all. And you might have a different effect than what I'm showing. All right, so now that I have this thing here and I've got everything up on GitHub, I can go back to my Unity Hub and launch it again. So I'm going to go back to Lab 2A and launch it. And it's just going to bring it up much faster than before. So the first thing I want to talk about is how to move from scene to scene. One of the things that I've asked you to do next week for assignment 1, part 1, is create simple interfaces. What I talked about last week was in our example here, this little button, the start button here, what I've done is I've made it so that couple things have happened, right? The canvas itself, I've changed the canvas itself so that the render mode is screen space camera, okay? And I've used the main camera in the scene right now, this one, as the render camera. This is not always the case, okay? But in mobile, it makes sense. The plane distance is 100, doesn't really make any difference. My UI scale for this, I've used a reference resolution of 1440 by 2560, right? So this is all the same stuff. And I've used a match. The match property is in the between width and height. So it kind of does both. And I'm still using a graphic raycaster. So that's the canvas itself. The start button and the start button itself, I haven't touched anything in the start button. But down inside there is a text item, right? A text object. And inside the text object, one thing we've changed from last week, just as a review, is I've gone and I wanted to make it so that I've checked off best fit. And what best fit does is it creates a range of font sizes for your text based on you can see that there are constraints, if you will, for the button itself. So now you can see that the start button, if I make it bigger, then the text will grow larger or go smaller depending on the size of my start button. So that's the first thing that I want to do. I also want to respect during my design, which what I'm doing right now, the fact that I have this safe area. So would be smart. Something that would be smart to do is not design anything that's going to hit the corners over here or over there, or make it so that there's some kind of code that allows me to shuffle my user interface so it doesn't go into the safe area, outside of the safe area, like in here where the camera is, or maybe where there was if you're in it with an iPhone, there'll be a cutout right here that exists. Okay, so the safe area, this yellow area here, is where I want my code and my user interface to work within. Okay, so that's the first thing. So what I want to do now is I want to make several scenes, and I want to start by coding some simple scripts. And the first script, we have a start button script, and the start button behavior script, what it did last time when we ran it, remember, if I want to create a build, and I want to build it for mobile, for LD player, right? So here, this thing here, I've got a couple of examples here of how I did it. By the way, with LD player, if you hold one of these things, you can always trash them, like we talked about before. It'll ask you if you want to remove stuff from your little virtual machine, and that's okay. I think it's totally fine to kind of remove some old stuff so that you give more room in your VM. It doesn't grow. You don't want that to make it too big. It takes up space, so that's why we kind of remove them, and unclutters your screen for testing as well. So I want to build for mobile first thing. So I want to do the same thing, build for mobile. This takes some time. Hopefully you guys have had a chance to fix your problems when it comes to building for mobile. I've been doing it every week since we've got together, and this should be no difference at what we're doing here. So I'm just going to do my first build for mobile. So file, and I'm going to go build settings, and here I'm going to say build and run, and I'm going to choose a folder. I'm going to create a folder, a new folder called builds, and that builds folder right here is the folder that I want to use, and I'm going to call my file name is going to be lab2. Okay, my builds folder, it's going to be the APK or the Android package that I'm going to create, and click save. And when I do that, it's going to go through the process, and you're going to see me spark out for a second as it's going to use as much CPU power as possible to convert my project and target the Android platform. Yeah, so it's going to happen. I'm going to spark out in a second. What you want to see here is all the, what you're going to see is all the differences that are going to happen. So sorry about the weird sound effects. It'll happen to you too. If you're broadcasting live, you'll see me kind of zip in and out. And it's because, oh no, my CPU is pretty powerful. It's just because I'm doing a lot, right? So yeah, it has nothing to do with my PC. I'll do it, Vincent, just for you, right? Yeah, I won't be upgrading my CPU anytime soon. There's still a CPU shortage out there. But we'll see how it goes. Yeah, I've got a 10900K. I'm pretty good with what I got right now. And it's everywhere. CPU, GPU, it's all chip shortages are everywhere. So, and I've got a RTX 3070 as my GPU, so that's pretty good. Yeah, but I'm also doing more. So I'm broadcasting live on YouTube. I'm broadcasting with what I'm doing here. I'm supporting 3 monitors, a virtual machine, and a bunch of other stuff going on all at the same time. So. Okay. I'm not doing no pre-build, man. I build my own stuff, right? So. No, the Alienware, you know what? If we're in person, that would be totally different. Yeah, we're going to do that when we get together again in the winter semester. If we get together in the winter semester and we have a chance to see each other in person, that'd be awesome. All right, so one thing I wanted to show you when I have my success, I'm up now, so you should see this as well, is Logcat. And last time I just kind of closed it and ignored it. But this time I'm going to bring it up and I want to mention this a little bit and what it does. It's connected, my Logcat is connected to my Android emulator. And you can see in the emulator right now, if I go back into LD Player, that it's running. Remember what I did was when I clicked the start button in Unity in the simulator, it actually puts it in the console. But if I click the start button here with Logcat running, then it actually responds, and you can see that it responds in the console here as well. So this is kind of the important thing. So console commands or console out isn't a negative thing. As an example, if we are able to, kind of show, sorry, it looks like I've got a delivery coming. The doorbell's going to ring 100%. It's going to say, someone's at your doorbell. It's coming. Anyway, so notice when I press the start button, it did that. And this is good because it gives us good feedback immediately in Logcat. All right, let's stop everything. So I'm going to stop my project, and I'm going to keep Logcat here, but I can always reconnect it. I can always go back, so I can disconnect and reconnect if I want to. So let's disconnect. So I've just disconnected and close it down. And Logcat is just a tool for us to be able to get a console right from our live device that's connected. Okay.
Sir, when you said stop the project, what did you do? Did you close LD Player? Did you minimize it?
No, it's a tab. So I have LD Player working with tabs. So if I was to launch this again, you can see that it launches. Yeah, I just close this tab down, okay, and then we're good to go. So that's what I did. So that way it's just easier. Instead of closing LD Player and running it again, it's pain, right? So.
What is this? Can you go into just a little bit further in the description? What is this Logcat thing?
Logcat is almost like another. So what it does, it gives you almost like a all this the stack trace from basically the call stack. It shows you the call stack of all the processes that are going on in your phone, right? So if I was again going to run that and connect Logcat. So again, if I was to go,
it's like an Android.
That's what I showed you. I showed you a debug log, right? Where I kind of did a debug log right from Unity right into the Logcat, so you can actually do a debug log, right? So yeah, so that's what it does. So if I go to Android Logcat, let me show you that again. So if I go to Android Logcat, bring it up. So it's under analysis. That's where it'll come up, right, with this project. Now notice it says connected, right? And notice start button pressed. That was me clicking the start button, and I have a script, the start button behavior script. And the start button behavior script is loaded in Visual Studio 2019. And you can see that every time I press the start button, when I connected it, it outputs to the log, right? So that's your debug log. That's your console log, if you're equivalent, right? And instead of outputting here, if I ran it in Unity, so if I go back to Unity and I run it locally, like here, right? So now I'm running it in the simulator in a second. So let me show you what's happening here. So here's Android Logcat. Let's just park it somewhere. So it's here. So we don't have to worry about it. So we'll put it just around there. There it is, next to the simulator. So now that it's running live. If I click start, then notice inside the console, when I click start, it shows start button pressed. That's just a console command that's connected to my button. In Android Logcat though, right? You can see that the time is 13:16, right? That's because my Android device is not set up for, which is the emulator. The emulator is not set up for daylight savings time, so it's showing basically the time that it has set up. And so it happened before this. This is a later time than what's happening here. So here, Logcat is something that I want to connect to the Android device. So if I pull up the Android device again, let's go pull up my emulator and run my program, this one. And just like when Unity is running here and it's outputting to the console here, right? Then when I run Android Logcat and it's connected to my device and I click start, then what I should see is the start button press command running right here. So let me show you that again. So again, and by the way, with Logcat, what you can do is you can disable it. You can close off this window if you want to, right? Minimize it, maximize it, do whatever you want to do. And if I want to bring it up again, I can always get to Analysis, Android Logcat, which brings this up. I can, with Android Logcat, yes?
I pressed it a few times, like while it's running. It's connected, and it's running in my Unity and my LD player, and I pressed it a few times. I can't get more than 2 start button press to appear in my Logcat.
Well, again, it's usually a repetition of the same process. Notice the process ID didn't change, right? So all you're doing is you're outputting to the log, and yeah, it may not show everything perfectly. Like if I press this again and again, it's not going to update this unless I rerun my code, right, for the first time, and you'll see that happen.
So
but what it does,
so what does that mean?
when I rerun my code, it reconnects to Logcat, and then like right now, it doesn't seem that I'm actually connected, and I wonder if it's because I have to reconnect to my tools, right? Again, here, and you can clear the log, right? So if I disconnect and reconnect, I'm wondering if when I'm running my code for the first time, let's just rerun that. Unless I'm running the live build with Unity, I think that's the only time that I get that message, because then it won't show up here. So let's.
I just got it.
Nothing to be confused about. It's just output, right? So it helps us with again. It helps us with what we're looking at here. So if I was to rerun this thing, let's say I rebuild it. This is just eating up some of our time though when I do this, because you know how long the build takes, right? But the errors, like Tam says, it's useful most useful for errors, and it's the most useful for almost like a stack trace or a call stack for what's going on. All the processes that are live, you'll see there, and I'll show you one more time when I do it. It'll run Logcat, and it'll run rebuild my project. I'm going to spark out here for a second when I do that, but it should be a little bit quicker because I haven't done anything. It's going to be an incremental build, so it should be okay. And Tam is correct. It didn't have it years back. It was only available in Android Studio. So debugging, and you don't know what's happening, you don't know what values you're getting without Logcat, I think is a crazy thing to do. And we used to basically take our Android build from Unity, bring it into Android Studio, run it in Android Studio, run it with Logcat there, and you know, it was pretty good. There you go. So now we're connected to Logcat. We got our thing happening, and if I bring up my project again and I click Start, you can see responses every time I click it for the most part, right? And you can see that there's 3. 1, 2, 3 presses. If I press it again, then it'll be 4, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4. And every time I press it, it'll give you responses. But like Tam said, the majority of reasons why we use Logcat is for errors. Anything that comes up in red like this, if there's an issue, if there's some kind of problem, then it'll come up like this. Yellows are warnings typically, and whites are okay. They're just information. All right, so that's what Logcat is about. I'm going to go back to this just to keep moving. So now that we've got our start button and it works, and we know we can get information out of it, we can use console log, which is our debug log. So if I go back to Visual Studio, I use the debug log in order for us to output the debug. And I created my own event on start button pressed. That's the event that I used to connect my button to the code. And what I did was inside the canvas game object, we have a start button game object. I just called it start button. And what I've done is my start button behavior is actually connected to my start button. Not always the most common way of doing things. Sometimes your behavior is connected to your canvas or some other game object as well. It doesn't have to be on the button itself. But what I want to do is I want to have several scenes. And this is where we're going to make that change today. And it's going to help you with your assignment 1. I want to have 3 scenes. My start scene, my play scene, and my end scene, and I want to have buttons to go from one scene to the other scene and back. Okay, and how do I do that? Well. What I want first is I want, with my start button behavior, we're going to modify this as an example, and I can have one script that works across all the buttons, or I can have multiple scripts, one for each button, and I'm going to take that approach to make it easier for now. So let's go back to scenes, and what I want to do is in my main scene, I want to duplicate it. Let's duplicate my main scene, please. So the way to duplicate, you can right-click and I want to copy and paste, or if you press Control-D, it duplicates the scene, so it creates the same scene with a different name, main 1. Let's rename this scene to Start. Okay? And the same thing, if you try it again, if I press main, if I press Control-D, we'll make another one, and we'll call this the end. So there's 3 scenes: start scene, main scene, end scene. Okay, our start scene, as an example, if I double click on it, now you can see that the scene will switch to start. There's no difference here because it's the exact same for each scene. You'll see no difference whatsoever. But now I have 3 scenes. What I want to do before I do anything else is I want to go into my file and I want to go into my build settings. Here's my build settings. And you can see that the only scene that I have listed in my build settings is main. What I want instead is to drag and drop my start scene in there and my end scene. And I want obviously my start scene to be coming up before my main scene. So I just want to just drag this up so you can change the order: start, main, and end. Again, other ways to do this. But you can see that the scene order, think about this as an enumeration for the scenes. This is scene 0, scene 1, and scene 2, where scene 0 starts off first, then it's scene 1 and scene 2. Okay? So I've got 3 scenes in my build settings. I have to have them listed here from what I'm going to do next. Okay? If you don't have your scenes listed here, you'll never be able to move from one scene to the other. Okay, next, at least not with a scene manager. All right, next, now that I have this, I want to change my start button behavior. So I'm going to go into my scripts and I'm going to go into start button behavior. And what I want to put in is a new using statement up here. So I want to go using, and I want to go Unity Engine dot scene management. Okay, so I want to add scene management as a new using statement. Think about the using statement as an import for C#. And what this allows you to do is use additional the API that's kind of inside of my namespace, scene management, and I can have additional functionality that I've just enabled. All right. So this time, instead of doing my start button pressed event here, let's get rid of my debug log, right? And what I want instead is I want to scene switch, right? So I want to scene switch. When I press my scene, my on start button pressed, I want to move to my main scene, right? So I can do that by saying something like, so if I start putting scene manager dot load scene, right? I can choose the name of the scene. I can either choose the enumeration number, so 0, 1, 2, 3, which sometimes we may need to do, or I can use the scene name as a string, right? That I want to load up. So the string name as a scene is called main, right? And you have to be exact. So it has to be the exact name of the scene that I want to load. So if you're not sure, go back to Unity and check out what the scenes are named.
It's a capital M, sir.
That's right. So there you are. So that's got to change to capital M. Otherwise, it won't work. So what this will do is it will dispose of all the assets in the current scene. That's what this does. And it will load all the assets from the new scene, main. Okay? And that means all variables, all data, everything is gone from the first scene unless you say otherwise, unless you do some other kind of shenanigans in order for you to keep the data from the first scene and pass it to the second scene. There's different ways of doing that. One of my favorite ways is using scriptable objects, okay? But there are other ways of doing it as well. You can use player preferences because scriptable objects, as you'll see, they also go away. They get overwritten, whereas player preferences stay. Okay, so now that I load my main scene, I want to go to my main scene with my onStart button pressed event. And my name of my class is start button behavior, right? Well, I want to just copy this because I'm going to do this a couple times again, because I make 3 buttons. I'm going to make my start button, my next button as an example, and I'm going to also make a back button, right? That takes me back and restarts.
So shouldn't you have a button manager for that?
Correct. But I'm not doing that right now. I'm going to do one step at a time because I want to just get them. Remember, you know stuff they don't know. And I'm going to start off with, like as if we're going to have one script, one button for now. But yes, you can have a button manager. You can have a lot of different things, right? And if you want to do that, go ahead, right? I'm not going to stop you. I think it's probably the right thing to do, or it's better than what I'm doing. But don't worry about that, guys. One step at a time, right? So now that I've got this working, it's going to go there. I want to go to my main scene. And in my main scene, I have it looks the same as my other scene. But what I want is I want to take this button that's here, and I want to put it towards the bottom of my screen, right? So let's take it, but within the safe area. So this is something that I want to be cognizant of, right? So when I grab my button.
Can we make a prefab folder around this point and start saving stuff?
Yaniv, my friend, you teach your course, I'll teach my course. Just chill. All right? I can't keep stopping. I'm not going to get it done for them, and I'm reporting it. So wait for a second. I will get there. I promise you. All right. So like Yaniv said, I could make a prefab, but I'm not going to, Yaniv. Not yet. You're going to do it your way. All right? I'm going to go through step by step. Very, very slow. Okay. So scenes here as an example, right? You've got our start button. And what I want to do with the start button, just like I did before, is I want to duplicate it. So again, Control D. So go in here, Control D. I'll have 2 start buttons. Start button 1, start button. I want to click on start button 1 and pull it towards the bottom, right? But again, being cognizant of the bottom of the screen, if I want to flip this around, right, as an example, remember that we're not supporting upside down mode for our game right now. But think about where this would be if I did support upside down mode. This would flip around and be down here. So we want to make sure that we've given enough space so that it stays within the safe area, which means probably somewhere up here. Okay. So this is where the button is going to be. I'm also going to pull it to the right as an example because this is going to be my next button, and that's what I'm going to rename it, next. And I'm also going to make my start button new. I'm going to change that name. So this is going to be the back button. Okay. And I'm going to take this back button again, go down all the way to where my start button was. Again, by eye, you can do this other ways. For example, you may want to do it numerically, and we're going to do that in a second. And I want to set it up so that it's down here. Okay, so start. This will be called my back button. So my back button, my text for my back button is going to say back. And we're also going to say the text for the next button is going to say next. Okay, there we go. And now you're going to see back and next. You want them to be on the same level. So you can see that relative to each other, we're using the center of the screen right now as a pivot point. That's the pivot or anchor, right? As an example, we can definitely change this pivot or anchor, especially when it comes to responsive design, right? So what I want to do is I want to give as much space on the left-hand side as I do for this one. So if this button's position, and again, you can see that the position changes on the x-axis. Let's suppose I'm going to give it something like a negative 380 or a negative 340, right? So, and then I'm going to move this itself closer to the right side, and it should be balanced. So usually 340 is what's going to happen. So 340, a negative 340, and that's where this is going to appear, my back and next buttons. My back button is going to have a different behavior than my next button or my start button. Okay, all those things are going to be very different. Okay, so, which is totally cool, right? Like, you can have as many different, whatever, all the behaviors that you want. for the buttons. But back will take, what I wanted to do is take me back to the start scene. Next, it's going to take me to the end scene. Okay, as an example. Okay, so if I go to my scripts and my start button behavior, right? I want to make two new scripts, my back button behavior and my next button behavior. Let's do that. So I'm going to create a new script, and we'll call this the back button behavior. And we'll make another one called the next button behavior. Okay, so back button, next button, and back button, next button, start button, they're all the same. Jan have said it best. It might have been good, and maybe we'll do that in a future video where we do the one button manager or some kind of command pattern where we use, kind of one script that kind of handle everything in one. Yes, you can. You can make your cut methods. Yes, it hurts, I know, but just we have to go slow for the people who don't know how to do basic things. Let's go back to these. So back button, obviously, what we want to do is replace the script that we had, the same script that we had in the start button. I want to put it in the back button. So in the back button goes here. We need the scene manager. Luckily that I'm using ReSharper or C++, it says I want to use the import types of the pasted code. It adds the scene manager in, and C#, ReSharper or C# also does the same thing. And this time with our back button. Now this is something interesting. I'm going to go back, but where am I going to go back to, right? So here I'm going to go back to, in this case, the start scene. But what about if I use the back button and I want to go back from the end scene to the main scene? How does that work? So we got to be able to, figure out a scene hierarchy, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But for now, I just want a back button to go back to the main scene, and then the next button goes to the end scene, and that's it. We can also have a restart button, but God forbid, Yana will go crazy if we have that. All right, so let's see if we have those things. We have this thing, and let's go back to our script and the next button, right? As an example, one thing at a time, like we said. In my next button, I'm just going to wipe all this out, and we're just going to have a thing that goes to the end scene. My scene manager, I want to definitely import my scene management kind of a namespace. So I've got all the scripts done for the buttons, right? So they're just the same script, different button. Okay, awesome. And what I want to do here, right, is with back button, next button, start button, all these kinds of things, right? That's great. If that's okay. So start, next, and back button. What we want to do here is for the back button, notice because it's a copy of our the buttons, the start button, it has the start button behavior embedded, so we want to remove it. So let's remove that component. And the same thing goes for next button. Let's just be preemptive and get rid of the start button behavior as well. Again, if you had one script, you wouldn't only have to have one script that you can pass along from one to the other. We're not doing that right now. So we're going to get the next button, and we're going to attach it to the next button itself. Next button behavior attached to the next button. There we go. And the same thing goes with our back button behavior. We're going to attach it to the back button. And let's just collapse some of these to make it easier for us to do that. So back button behavior, we're going to kind of add it to that. There we go. And that's for the back button. Awesome. Okay, great. But now the next thing we have to do is for the button itself, for the next button, it says we're missing a runtime. And I'm just going to drag and drop my next button in there, where I've got to select, just like we did before, the next button behavior, and I'm going to go on to, now where it says on start button press, it's the same name. We didn't change the name of my code, and this is something we can do in here. So if we really wanted to, this is where we can put it together. So for the back button, it doesn't make sense that our code is called on start button pressed. It should be called something to do with the back button. So on back button pressed, right? There we go. And the same thing goes for my next button. Instead of next button, we can say on next button pressed. Okay, on next button pressed. That's going to go to the end scene, but what if I wanted to make the next button be the start button? So you only really need 2 buttons, to start the next button and the back button. Then you have to know which scene came beforehand from a scene hierarchy perspective, all right? Which is not a big deal. All right, so this is the back button, this is the next button, and there's two different functions now, on next button pressed as well as on back button pressed. Okay, cool, go back to Unity now, and when we go into the next button, here's my next button, the script that we want to use for the function now is, in next button behavior, is on next button pressed. Again, if you had one manager, you can just select the script that makes sense for the button, okay? And in the back button, same thing, I'm going to drag and drop that in here, and then go here, go to the back button behavior, and go to on back button pressed. So there we have a very simple way of going to the end scene. So if you're going to demonstrate, the start scene, the play scene, and the end scene, you could do that now. And the way to do that is, let's start inside the start scene. So I'm going to go back to the start scene. The end scene doesn't have shouldn't have any button right now. Actually, let's fix that scene first before we go there. So double click on the end scene. You can see that there is a button there. And for now, all I want to do is I just want to hide this button. So just to make it seem like there is nothing there. But, when we get to this point where there's nothing there, we can put a label in here or something else that shows the end scene. We don't even have that. All right, so let's go back to the start scene. Right, so we'll save that. Go back to the start scene. We see that there's a start button. And let's run it here in the simulator first. So in the simulator, let's make sure that this runs first locally, and then we can check it how it works on the emulator. So if I click the start button, it takes me to the new scene. You can see that I've loaded the main scene now in the hierarchy. If I click back, it goes to the start scene again. I get my start button back. Click start, goes to the main scene again. If I click next, it goes to my end scene, and there's no way back to go from my end scene right now to back to my start scene. Okay, so pretty straightforward. That's how you can show your entire project for next week. Okay, so a few buttons, and they do the entire gamut. Now, what about if you wanted to make it with one script? How would you go about doing that, especially when you don't know where you came from the script itself? You don't know what the previous scene was. There's no record of it. Once the previous scene is destroyed, like I said, it's gone. How do you transmit the information about what scene you were in previously? Example would be if I was going to go from the previous button to the next button. So again, I've shared some script. And it says he's using the start button and he's using the cursor lock state for that. Nice, nice, nice. You're seeing some of the stuff he's done here. I'm opening up you made your own custom event listener. And that's beyond what I wanted to do right now, Yaniv. Because you're using a custom event listener as opposed to the drag and drop type. And then you're loading scene 1 with a number as opposed to the name, which is fine. So again, how would you know? How would you go? You got to load with a number with next and back, but what number came before? Unless the only way you know this is from the scene itself. So depending on the scene that you're in, you have to kind of know what the current scene is, right? Again, there's one. So get active scene index, right? Your build index, and depending on what you want to do, that's one of the ways you can do it right there. So scene manager has a lot of little elements here, and let me show you what those are. So scene manager just doesn't load scene. Scene manager knows a bunch of different things, right? So let's take a look at the scene manager for a second. So scene manager dot, and then again, you can see that there are a bunch of different methods, right? So you can see that it also has things like I can set an active scene, right? As an example, these are the basics when it comes to that. And if you actually look at the scene manager up online, so let's take a look at the scene manager script up online. So if I go Unity scene manager, I know for those people who are advanced, thank you, that's nice. But for those people that aren't, let's take a look at Unity scene manager. So if we go to the scene manager script, there's a scripting API for this one, and it'll show us all of the main methods and what it looks like. So if I look at, it says loads the scene by its name or index in build settings, whatever the index that you had appropriated there, all right? And then there's different kinds of events. If the scene gets loaded or if the scene doesn't get loaded, you can get scene by name. You can get scene by build index. You can get scene at the index in the scene manager, and you can get the active scene. So if I go get active scene, and it gives you an example of whatever the scene is, you can get a reference to the scene itself. Okay, whatever that scene is, and again, each scene is something that you can load and play with and whatever. Okay. Yeah, maybe you want to post your code on Discord, Yaniv, so this way, then they can use the stuff, the pieces of the stuff that they want to use. Okay, so can you include everything in there? Absolutely. Yaniv has posted a piece of code that, I've got my scene manager, load scene, and I want to use my scene manager, get active scene, and then when I do that, get active scene itself, this one, get active scene allows me to have additional functionality from there, where the active scene allows me my scene index. Let me show you that. I'm sharing the code that our students are sharing here online. By the way, we're timing out. Just want to make sure that this is good. So if I say scene manager here, and then get active scene, and then if I put dot, and I want to get the build index or name, by the way, the name or the build index is also good. Then whatever the active scene is, I can figure this out, and I can use the build index for the actual scene number. Let's say, for example, I want to show what the back button behavior is, the actual current scene that I'm in. If I'm using the back button, then I'm probably in the main scene, which is scene 1. Okay, so we can actually output that. Let's try this out. So debug.log, right, where we can see what the build index is of the active scene in the log. Let's try this out. So again, if I go back to Unity, and if I run it, and let's start with the start scene. I'm there in the start scene. The one hint that you're running is where this function that comes up that is don't destroy on load. That basically has a set of variables that it keeps in mind. If I click start, I'm in the start scene now, and if I press the back button, right, because remember we have our code that I put in inside the back button behavior, right? If I click the back button, then the scene that I was in was scene 1. So just like what's been typed in the chat, as an example, what you're getting is the number of the scene that you're in. So what you could do then, let's stop this. Instead of using multiple files, right, that I've been using with back button, next button, and start button, what you can do is exactly what they're saying, which is scene manager, get active scene, you get your build index, and if I want to go to the next scene, it's whatever my current index is plus 1. If I want to go to my previous scene, it's whatever my build index is minus 1. And that would be the way that that's the scene that I would load in the scene manager. So scene manager, load scene, my back button would go minus 1. It would go one previous, the previous scene, whatever that previous scene. And obviously the danger there is, what if there's no previous scene? If you put the wrong button in a scene that there is no previous scene, you might get a bit of an error, but then you would know how to do that. So it's pretty simple, and I think Unity gives you a lot of tools for us to do it without making all this code happen. But for now, what I wanted to show you is this, and then let's just do a quick build. Well, plus, you don't have to do a plus plus. You just have to say whatever the current scene is plus 1, and whatever the previous scene was minus 1. As an example, you could, if you want to use a decrement or an increment in some strange way, you can. But again, the idea is, and Vineet's asking, isn't there a way to pass the current scene as a parameter? You wouldn't need to do that, Vineet, because you have the build index anyway. So that's the way. And you can also not just get the build index, but also the name of the scene, whatever the current name is. So let's make this work now in the emulator. We did it nicely for the simulator. Let's make sure that it works just the way this is with 3 different buttons in the emulator, and then let's see what happens. Okay. So again, let's just do a build and run. So file, save, file, build and run, and this should work fine. It's going to take some time. I'm going to spark out, and thank you for the people that are up online and making some suggestions. I like the fact that, you guys, some of you are more advanced when it comes to Unity than others. And the idea here is we want everyone to be on the same playing field, right? So I don't want to skip steps. I want to kind of show the basics and then refactor. Remember that my motto is always, sorry, I'm sparking out here, make it work and then refactor, okay? Always. Refactoring is easy. Okay, so let's see how this goes. And it should work, right? Test it with yourself. Go on the emulator for you and then make sure that your scene, you can go from one scene to the other scene. It's an important part of what we want you guys to do for Lab 2. Okay, and if anyone has any challenges, please let me know at this point, because it shouldn't be a challenge whether you're using a single button to do everything, or whether you're using a single controller, to have all your buttons work, or if you're using multiple buttons, multiple scripts, as an example, that's fine too. So again, I didn't make any prefabs, none of that kind of stuff right now. I think there's a lot of stuff that I can do to improve things. And, again, we're going to get there as we go forward. Let's see how this looks in the player. So again, I'm going to go back into LD player, and here I'm in the start scene. If I click start, I can see that in LD player, and let's make this a little bit smaller here so you guys can all see it. I see the back and the next button here, but they're dangerously close to the bottom of the screen. And this is where, like I said to you before, right? That's weird, Max. We're going to have to get together. Max is saying he's still having some issues. But you see here, it's dangerously close to the bottom of the screen, right? And so why would that be? I mean, look where I put them here, and look what it looks like on the Unity side, right? So again, if we just remove Logcat for a second so we can see, and if I go back to the main scene, right, I can see that there's quite a bit of space here on the main scene, right? And yet, when I go here, take a look at the space that I'm seeing in my emulator. So now, for the people that are online, before we stop for the day, why do you think that is? The emulator simulator is the same. No, it is. They're the same device, right? For the most part, they're set up the same. I've got the same reference resolution. What is the problem? Because this is not an error in terms of like a systemic error or a syntax error. It's something else. Okay, so I've set it up as kind of the way I've got it. So what about you? Sam says, is it an anchoring thing? And it might be, right? Because remember, what about if I try to rotate the device right here as well, right? So I want to rotate this on, to different, kind of orientations. Can I rotate my device, right? So your works in Unity. How about yours on Yaniv on the device? Can you make it work on the device? So why, here's the original question, Vincent. Why do I have a different interface right here on my device and on the simulator? In the simulator, I show lots of room on the bottom. On the emulator, not so much room. Okay, that's the challenge. And this is where, if you actually took this on a real device, maybe it would look different as well. And that's why we have both. That's why we do work on both the emulator and the simulator, because clearly this is a problem. This is way too low on the device. And there's a reason for this. We're going to explore next week. Okay, if I click next, I'm going to go back into my main scene or my man scene, but there's no way back right now. I have no way back to get to my start scene because I didn't program that. Okay, so that's something that of a problem. It's a bit of a problem. Okay, so any other questions before we go for the day?
Pertinent to the assignment.
Yeah.
When you listed in the GDB requirements, it said something about about like certain versions that you want to put in the GDB as well. What does that pertain to?
So pretty much what I want you to do in there is in the GDD, see like the current version, what features, you'd list the features that it would have, similar to what we've done with our SDL engine. So if you actually look at any kind of API that you're developing, right? So here up on George Brown, I might have SDL engine, right? And what all I care about is the latest features. So if I go back to releases, then what I want to do is say any known bugs that I have for this release and the latest changes for this version. That's what I'm looking for. So for example, if you go back, you can see that I fixed remove job bug, and this is the latest thing. Any kind of bugs that I have, known bugs for this one, and any kind of issues as an example for
so
this.
It's essentially like a dev log.
Pretty much, yeah, at the most. And you want to also maybe list your, you also want to list your GitHub repository as well. Just give a, kind of like, indicate what your GitHub repo is. That's it.
Okay, gotcha.
No problem.
Oh, it actually works. I see my thing at the bottom. I just full screen LD player.
There you go.
I mean, it's still off, but the buttons are actually working. So.
It's off, yeah, and it's off because of your reference resolution and a bunch of other things. We're going to talk about doing stuff next week. Otherwise, guys, that's your first part of your lab. So part 1 of lab 2, that's today, and then we'll add more stuff, obviously, than what we have. This is nothing. But we're going really slow here with the build, and the reason why we're doing this is because I want you guys to get a sense of how to put things together, how to go from one scene to the other. We need that for assignment 1, and we're going to need that for assignment 2, and even for next year. Okay. Any questions before we go for the day? All right. If we don't have any questions, I'm going to stop on YouTube here, and then what we're going to do is go further.